The bath. I recount now, in a single continuous voice, the strange history of a man who lay down one night in a cheap New York bathtub and awoke, as if by some caprice of the universe, in a house that belonged to no ordinary geography, and perhaps to no ordinary time. In New York City, there lived a cab driver of 28 years, a man whose days were so regular that each seemed merely a faint copy of the last. Each morning he rose early, took his coffee from a corner tavern, and began his 10-hour shift, threading the streets of the city in his taxi. Each evening, he returned to a cramped one-bedroom apartment, consumed a dull microwave dinner, and rewarded himself with a hot bath before bed. This routine had persisted almost unaltered since he had dropped out of college 9 years before and taken to driving as his livelihood. It was a life of small fatigues and smaller consolations, and yet it was his own, grounded in familiar streets and the ordinariness of modern existence. That such a life could be severed, as if by the closing of a door, was something he had never imagined. The First Awakening. One evening, with no particular omen to distinguish it from any other, he settled into his bath and, lulled by warmth and weariness, simply fell asleep. When at last he woke, it was not the heat but the bite of cold water that roused him, and his first thought, fogged as it was that he had overslept in his own tub. But as his senses returned, he perceived that the room surrounding him was not his familiar, modest bathroom. He found himself in the lavatory of a large, old-fashioned mansion of a style that seemed more appropriate to the 18th or 19th century than to the present. The fittings and tiles were alien to him, not merely because of their grandeur, but because they spoke of another age altogether. Eventually, he found the courage to climb from the tub, dry himself, and don a white bathrobe that hung neatly upon the back of the door, as if waiting precisely for him. He went to the sink, splashed cold water on his face, and then, with that peculiar mix of dread and curiosity that such situations inspire, stepped out into the corridor. The hallway beyond the bathroom was unfamiliar and unnervingly quiet. Moving slowly, he came upon a large bedroom where he discovered a closet full of clothes which, disturbingly enough, fit him perfectly. Gathering himself as best he could, he descended to the lower floor and found a huge living room adjoining an oversized kitchen. There were candles, and upon the counters a knife which he took up, more as a talisman of control than as a weapon he knew how to use. In the dining room, he paused for a long time. An elaborate meal had been laid out upon the table, neatly arranged, as if awaiting honored guests. His stomach growled, as though he had not eaten for days, yet he could not bring himself to touch the food. The very perfection of the spread only heightened his suspicion. Instead, he resumed his desperate search of the house, testing doors and windows, only to find every door tightly locked and every window sealed and bricked over from without. At last, he retreated upstairs, barricaded himself in a bedroom, and resolved to wait for whoever had brought him to this place. Hours passed. Fatigue, that old companion from his days of driving, now wrapped in fear, overtook him. He lay down, the knife clutched tightly in his hand, and though he tried to remain vigilant, sleep conquered him. The empty house and its provisions. The next 2 days passed in a strange, feverish repetition. Each day he frantically explored the mansion, searching for any means of escape. Each day he refused to touch the extravagant meal in the dining room, as though this boycott were his last fragile assertion of autonomy. Each evening he sealed himself back in his chosen room, knife in hand, and tried to outstare the darkness. On these explorations, he came to know the house more intimately, though that knowledge brought little comfort. It was dark and eerily quiet, and he found no modern technologies, no television, no telephones, nothing of the convenient apparatus of his former life. There was, however, a library full of books on history, science, and mathematics, volumes which hinted at a mind, or minds, of serious intent behind the mansion's creation. In the basement, he discovered shelves stocked from floor to ceiling with medical supplies and a wide variety of building materials, as if someone had provisioned the place for a long siege or a great project. Stranger still, just off the main living room, he found an odd collection of old artifacts lying silently beside a large, 7-foot-tall silver structure, which he could only regard as some sort of inoperable computer. It stood there like a dormant idol, reflecting his bewildered face in its metallic planes. More than a week went by, and no one came. The once sumptuous food on the dining table spoiled, filling the air with the bitter smell of waste. Desperate and starving, maddened by the silence and his own helplessness, he lashed out in anger. He tore apart the kitchen and destroyed what remained of the meal before finally collapsing from exhaustion. Later that night, he was awakened by a sound, a faint but unmistakable scratching coming from within the kitchen. With a mixture of terror and hope, he went to investigate. There, to his shock, he found the kitchen restored to order and, upon the table, a newly prepared meal, complete with all his favorite foods. In a frenzy, he searched the house for his captors, but he found no one. No sign of recent passage, no door ajar. Delirious, confused, and driven beyond endurance by hunger, he finally surrendered and ate. With his belly full and some of his senses restored, he became aware of a draft of cold air moving through the living room. The front door stood open, blowing back and forth in the winter wind. Without thinking, he leapt from the table and hurled himself through the doorway. Outside, he discovered that the mansion stood in the midst of a thick, snow-covered forest. A single pathway lined with pine trees led away from the house toward a standalone garage. Hope flared. Perhaps there was a car or some other vehicle by which he might escape. He followed the path, only to find the garage doors locked tight. Through large glass windows, he glimpsed, taunting him, 2 snowmobiles resting snugly inside. Nearby, he seized a shovel and tried to smash his way in, but the structure held. Turning then to the 30-foot brick wall that completely encircled the property, he made for the iron gates and tried to break through them as well. After 30 minutes in the snow, tired and freezing, circling the property in search of an opening and finding none, he retreated to the mansion to regroup. The next morning brought no relief. He explored the towering wall again and again, each attempt to scale it ending in failure. At night, he lay awake, plagued by unanswerable questions. Who were his captors? What did they want from him? How did they enter and leave the mansion without his notice? Would he ever escape this prison that masqueraded as a house? The scratching, the door, and the wolves. One night, while still trapped in this exhausting cycle of search and frustration, he was jolted from sleep by that same eerie, familiar scratching sound. Slowly, he rose from his bed and, with deep reluctance, descended the stairs to investigate. The front door of the mansion stood open again, swinging in the cold winter wind. To his astonishment, he also discovered the iron gate standing open to the forest beyond. Without pausing to consider, he forced his way through them and pushed into the deep, dark, blackened forest. He ran frantically along a makeshift path until he came upon cliffs overlooking a vast, black and blue ocean. For a moment, he considered climbing down and swimming for it, though the notion was as desperate as it was impractical. Out of nowhere, a pack of large, gray-tailed wolves with black teeth surrounded him. Panic compelled him to try to climb down the rock face of the cliff, but the spiked rocks made descent nearly impossible, and he was forced to abandon that route. The cold gnawed at him too, threatening to seize his limbs. Thus, he was driven to fight his way back toward the mansion through the ravenous animals, a desperate dance of dodging and retreating until at last he reached the house again. Shivering but alive, he built a fire in the living room fireplace and settled by the flames. Restoration came slowly. Heat crept back into his bones, and the immediate memory of the wolves receded. Just as he began to relax, from upstairs he heard once again the telltale scratching. This time, the sound came from the bathroom, followed by a loud splash, and then a heavy thud. The second arrival. He ascended the stairs, each step laden with dread, and there he found what he could never have anticipated: an unconscious woman lying on the bathroom floor. The bath water, which had apparently been the source of the splash, stood cold and still. He took the white robe from the back of the door and wrapped it around her, then carried her to a bedroom and tried to rouse her. Despite his efforts, days passed before she regained consciousness. In that time, he watched her intently, waiting for answers as though she were the embodiment of all the mysteries that had ensnared him. When at last she awoke, however, he was disappointed to find that she, like his earlier self, barricaded herself in the bedroom, refusing contact. Hoping to coax her out, he left food at her door each morning, but she did not emerge. 2 more days passed, and he decided he must resume his attempts to escape. One day, returning from the forest, he saw her at last. She was watching him through a library window. He entered, and they spoke for the first time. To his surprise, she demanded to know why he had taken her, and it quickly became evident that each believed the other to be the captor. Their mutual distrust cut the conversation short, and she retreated once more into seclusion. The next day, he discovered that all the markers he had been leaving in the forest to chart his explorations had vanished. This erasure, as though the landscape itself refused his attempts to map it, overwhelmed him with anger. Returning to the house, he found the woman calmly reading in the library, as though nothing in the world were out of place. He confronted her, and a heated argument ensued as he pressed her for answers. Fearing he might become violent, she reluctantly began to share her story. She was a nurse, she explained, who had come home one evening, fallen asleep in her bath, and awakened in this house. The resonance between her account and his own calmed him. At least in this they were alike, both victims of the same inexplicable translation. The plan to escape. Caution gave way, little by little, to cooperation. At dinner that evening, still wary, yet compelled by necessity, he revealed to her his plan: to build a rubber raft using the materials in the basement and escape by sea. He described what he had discovered in the forest, how near the left edge of the cliff there were stairs leading down to a small beach and a boat dock, how the raft might be launched from there. He spoke of the difficulties of determining their exact location and of the risks they would face if they ran out of food and water mid-ocean. Despite her lack of trust in him and the obvious dangers, she agreed to join his efforts. On the following evening, she took from the library a book on astronomy and used it to help him map the stars. Through this celestial triangulation, she deduced that they were on an island somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, perhaps near Alaska. With this new information, he decided their best chance lay in sailing east toward the mainland, and she agreed. Yet, even as collaboration deepened, so too did suspicion. Later that night, his mistrust returned when he saw her enter the room with the artifacts and begin to operate the strange silver machine. He had long deemed it inoperable, and now he was stunned that she appeared to know precisely how to use it. Convinced that she knew more than she had admitted, he seized a knife and went after her. Caught off guard, she screamed and begged for her life. With the blade at her throat, he demanded to know how she could work the device. Perplexed, utterly still, she asked in turn, slowly and deliberately, how it was that he could not. This question struck him like a blow. The absurdity of his position, knife in hand, and yet ignorant of the very things he accused her of concealing, broke through his rage. He lowered the weapon and allowed her to explain the machine and its operation. When she finished, it became clear that she was from another place, from a time beyond his own. At that moment, they both heard the scratching once again, this time from outside. They looked to the living room window, where the familiar pack of wolves stood silently watching them through the glass. It was as though the island itself, through these creatures, were aware of their every revelation. The failed escape and the book. Despite their fears, over the next few days, they worked together to build the raft. Using the supplies from the basement, they packed food and made ready for their flight from the island. When the raft was prepared, they ventured out into the snow once more. With her help, he succeeded in smashing open the garage doors. Soon, they were each astride a snowmobile, racing into the forest toward the hidden dock. Just before they reached it, the scratching sound arose behind them, borne on the wind from the dark forest. Minutes later, the wolves materialized ahead of them, blocking their path. She swerved her snowmobile to avoid them and was thrown, breaking her leg in the fall. Seeing this, he turned his snowmobile around and rode back to her. As the wolves closed in, he instinctively inflated the raft and used it as a decoy, drawing the animals' fury. While they tore at the rubber, he lifted her onto his snowmobile and sped back toward the mansion. Behind them, he saw the wolves destroying the raft and, with it, their carefully constructed dream of escape. Back in the house, he dressed her wounds as best he could, and then, drained beyond words, fell asleep beside her in the upstairs bedroom. Sometime in the night, he was awakened once more by scratching. Unwillingly, and with the heavy reluctance of one who suspects that knowledge may be worse than ignorance, he left her to investigate. Downstairs, in the library, he found a haunting blue light flooding the room. On a table near the window in the back left corner lay a strange book, open as if it had been waiting for him. On its cover were bizarre images and a title, The History of the New World. He surveyed the cover in astonishment and then opened it. As he read, he realized that the book was not merely recounting his past, but describing the future, just as the woman had hinted. Beyond the events she had spoken of, it detailed a great disaster that destroyed all life on Earth, followed by the rise of a new human civilization. This utopian society, the book claimed, knew no fear, war, hunger, or want of any kind. The Founders. In the final pages, the book spoke repeatedly of mankind's founders. Seeking to know who they were, he turned to the index and then to the referenced pages. There he found a photograph of an elderly married couple surrounded by several young adults. One woman held a smiling baby whose eyes were a peculiar green. He stared at the image for what felt like hours. Gradually, with a growing sense of both wonder and dread, he understood. The old couple were himself and the woman. The future civilization, the so-called utopia, owed its existence to them. They were to be its progenitors, the founders of the new world. He sat there for a while, in this chair, in front of the table, and breathed heavily, overwhelmed by the revelation. Through the library window, he could see the pack of wolves staring back at him, their eyes reflecting the same unearthly blue as the book's light. When he looked again at the pages, then up to the window, the animals had vanished silently into the snow. In their place, standing in the doorway of the library, was the woman. Her broken leg was completely healed. She stood there whole, as if the island, the house, the strange machine, and the very logic of the book had conspired to remake them both for the role they were now destined to play. Thus, the cab driver, who had once merely ferried strangers through the streets of New York, found that he himself had been ferried to a place outside the normal course of life, there to become, with this woman from the future, the origin of a world yet to be.